This is Ganghe Talatan Solar Park, the world's largest solar power plant. Sprawling across China's Qinghai province, it is so big that if ran at full capacity, it could power the entire country of Norway. And it's not alone. Zoom out and China's deserts are covered in vast solar and wind projects. The largest 3 solar plants and 3 wind farms are all located in China. The numbers are jaw-dropping. In 2024 alone, China invested $940 billion in clean energy technology. That's more than the entire GDP of Poland, and only slightly behind the world's total investment in fossil fuels. China accounted for 64% of all new renewable energy capacity added across the globe last year, and also produced 70% of all electric vehicles anywhere in the world. This is all part of Xi Jinping's Made in China 2025. China is in the process of fundamentally transforming both its own and the global economy. But how did they do this? Is China winning or just cheating? And what does it mean for the world economy in an era of protectionism and tariffs? This is Made in China, the new industrial revolution. China's journey to global industrial superpower started more than 40 years ago, in the aftermath of the death of Chairman Mao Zedong. Mao remains an icon in China today, but his economic legacy is mixed, to say the least. In a bid to rapidly industrialize the country and achieve economic self-sufficiency, Mao launched the Great Leap Forward in 1958. It was a catastrophe. Mass collectivization of agriculture, huge investment in heavy industry, and inefficient central planning backfired spectacularly, leading to famine that resulted in the deaths of between 15 and 55 million people. Mao died in 1976, leaving behind a poor, largely agrarian economy and a country still reeling from the political chaos of the Cultural Revolution. His successor, Deng Xiaoping, a man purged and exiled by Mao for being a capitalist rodent, remarkably rose to power in 1978. After the carnage of the Mao years, Deng saw the need for profound economic reform. He sought to wind back the ideological emphasis on state planning and collective ownership that had defined Mao's China. His market pragmatism was encapsulated in his saying, "It doesn't matter if a cat is black or white, as long as it catches mice." Under the slogan "Gaige Kaifang," reform and opening up, Deng began a process of gradual economic liberalization throughout the 80s. That meant allowing markets to set prices, opening up to foreign investment, and allowing entrepreneurs to set up private businesses. As Deng's reforms took hold in the 90s, China's economic growth started to pick up. Between 1980 and 2000, GDP per capita grew 5-fold, fueled by surging exports from Chinese factories to foreign markets. Around this time, Beijing set up economic special zones inspired by the advice of Lee Kuan Yew, with preferential tax and business incentives to stimulate investment. The most famous special economic zone was a once quiet fishing village on the border of Hong Kong called Shenzhen. In the 90s, Shenzhen was a boom town, attracting thousands of workers from across rural China to work in its factories, which produced everything from pens, clothes, and watch batteries. One of these workers was a young man called Wang Chanfu. Born to a poor family of 8 children in rural Anhui province in central China, Wang worked hard at school and went to study chemistry at university in nearby Henan province. After finishing university, he joined a new battery company in Shenzhen, and 2 years later, he left to launch his own company focused on making affordable, rechargeable batteries. He called the company Yadi Electronics, after the Yadi Road in Shenzhen, where it was originally based. Wang and his new company would go on to be a microcosm of the story of modern China. In the 90s, Chinese manufacturing had one thing really going for it: super low wages. In 1995, China's GDP per capita was just over $600 in current US terms, versus more than $12,000 in South Korea and $44,000 in Japan. This allowed producers like Wang's Yadi Electronics to outcompete larger Japanese manufacturers like Toyota and Sony on price, despite Japan's superior technology and advanced production lines. And business was booming. By 2000, Yadi Electronics had grown to become the world's largest mobile phone battery manufacturer. And Wang took the company public on the Hong Kong Stock Exchange in 2002, in the process raising over $200 million and cementing his status as one of China's top new capitalist entrepreneurs. And by this point, the company had a name that you might be more familiar with: BYD. China's rapid economic rise continued over the 2000s under the leadership of Jiang Zemin and Hu Jintao. In 2001, China joined the World Trade Organization, a defining moment in modern economic history that expanded Chinese goods' access to global markets in exchange for China's commitment to economic liberalization along international principles. China's GDP per capita surged by another fivefold in the 10 years following its accession to the WTO, and merchandise exports jumped to account for around 60% of GDP by 2007. Cheap Chinese goods flooded into foreign markets, and China started to build up large trade surpluses with the rest of the world. On the back of this export-led growth, China officially overtook Japan as the world's second largest economy in 2010. But despite all this, China's export economy remained largely focused on lower-end labor-intensive manufacturing. Back in Shenzhen, Wang had diversified BYD's business, acquiring a struggling car company to enter the auto industry. With its strength in producing rechargeable batteries, the company looked at producing hybrid and electric vehicles in China. However, it was still not a major player on the global market. In 2010, it ranked just 26th in vehicle production worldwide, far behind industry giants like GM, Volkswagen, and Toyota. The top spots were still dominated by the familiar names from the US, Germany, and Japan. And while the Chinese firms were gaining traction in the production of other clean energy technologies like solar panels, domestic usage remained minuscule. In 2010, 80% of the country's electricity came from burning coal. 30 years after Deng Xiaoping came to power, China was a changed country. They had moved from being a poor, closed agricultural society to a fast-developing global manufacturing hub, built mostly on exporting cheap, labor-intensive goods. Wang, the BYD boss, set a goal. The company would be the world's largest car producer by 2025. But this remained a distant hope. The economy was still rooted in dirty, low-tech manufacturing and relied heavily on other countries for high-end products. If China wanted to become a superpower, this had to change. President Xi Jinping came to power in 2012 with a vision to remake China as a superpower to chase a China dream. So in 2015, they announced a new economic strategy, Made in China 2025. Designed as a blueprint for the next stage of China's economic development, it outlined the weaknesses of China's economy and set out goals to eliminate them. It said that China's manufacturing industry was large but not strong, lacked innovation, and was dependent on foreign countries for core technologies and high-end equipment. It also identified key sectors for the country's future as a manufacturing powerhouse, including robotics, aerospace, biotech, electric vehicles, and renewable energy technology. The document was a clear directive for the state to back key modern industries that had begun emerging in the early 2010s. So 10 years on, in 2025, where are we? To put it simply, China now dominates the global clean energy supply chain. In the first 5 months of this year, China installed 244 gigawatts of new solar and wind energy capacity. That's about equal to more than 100 solar panels every second, and enough to power Indonesia or Turkey entirely. Chinese green technology companies such as BYD, Longi Solar, and Goldwind are world-class, both in terms of cost and product innovation. BYD is now the third largest auto brand by cars produced, and China now buys more electric cars than conventional gasoline ones, and it exports this dominance globally. China accounts for 80% of global solar panel production capacity. It represents 60% of global wind turbine production and up to 90% of global lithium battery production. BYD has established factories in Brazil, Hungary, Thailand, and Turkey, supplying electric vehicles directly to local markets in each region. And to top it all off, China's trade surplus was almost $1 trillion. There is no escaping it. China is winning the global industrial arms race. Real quick, we started a Discord community where you can submit ideas, ask us questions, or even debate us. It's free and you can find the link in the description. Now back to the video. To put it simply, Chinese technology companies are now among the most competitive in the world, but they didn't get there on their own. From start to finish, they've had extensive support from the Chinese government. In 2019 alone, the most recent year with reliable data, the government shelled out $400 billion in industrial support spending. This spending takes many forms. Most obviously, there are straightforward direct subsidies. China introduced purchase subsidies for electric vehicles in 2009 and only phased them out at a national level in 2022. paid directly to the car producer, the average direct subsidy per vehicle has fallen over time, from around $2,700 per vehicle in 2010 to $1,500 in 2022. But the aggregate amount has grown, surging to a whopping $5 billion in its final year in 2022. For example, BYD alone received $3.7 billion in subsidies between 2018 and 2022, including $2.2 billion in 2022 alone. Meanwhile, two of China's largest wind turbine manufacturers, Goldwing and Mingyang, received more than $160 million each in direct subsidies between 2018 and 22. What's more, renewable energy plants in China until this year enjoyed preferential pricing under a nationwide feed-in tariff where they were paid more per unit of electricity than coal producers. And while it no longer exists on a national scale, certain large provinces still offer similar schemes. Although direct subsidies are a big part, comprising around 22% of industrial spending analyzed in this study, it's far from the full picture. China provides tax incentives and credits to help these companies grow and operate, and to enable their R&D. It can provide them with cheap land and manage the prices of other input costs like electricity. Earlier this year, for example, Jiangsu province, one of the country's richest, cut industrial power prices by 9% to support local industry margins. And in fact, the largest way it supports these companies is by offering cheap loans. China has a highly centralized banking sector with state-owned banks owning 60% of all assets in the sector. This means they can lend extensively to help favored industries grow, calculated not by risk and return, but by the government's own priorities. According to central bank data, new bank lending to China's manufacturing sector has surged in recent years, as the government has sought to pivot the engine of growth away from the property sector to high-end manufacturing. Lastly, there are several forms of industrial support that are unique to China. The large share of state-owned enterprises in the economy means that they can use bulk procurement of new products by these companies to support the industry's early expansion. BYD, for example, received the world's largest public bus lease tender for electric buses in 2011 from the Shenzhen government. And government-owned investment vehicles can step in to provide equity funding in key industries, acting almost like venture capital investors. In 2020, the city government of Hefei in Anhui province directed local investment vehicles to buy a 24% stake in EV producer NIO for $1 billion, essentially to bail them out. All of this means that Chinese companies can operate and produce more cheaply. They have lower rent costs, lower tax burden, lower borrowing costs, and subsidized demand in their massive domestic market. Take the EV example. Between 2009 and 2017, China's EV industry received $61 billion in government support, with 80% of this in the form of direct subsidies and tax exemptions, 12% in government procurement, and around 3% from R&D grants and infrastructure subsidies. Altogether, government support covered around 23% of the cost of a new vehicle in 2018, or $13,000. Xi Jinping's Made in China strategy was built on massive state support from start to finish, and the West can't compete. China's dominance of the global renewable supply chain has become one of the most controversial issues in global trade. The flooding of cheap Chinese exports of solar panels, EVs, and wind turbines have led to calls from trade partners to introduce tariffs and other protectionist measures to keep them out. In 2024, the U.S. Treasury Secretary even warned that Chinese exports risked decimating American industry. Take solar panels, for example. Exports of solar panels in capacity terms have increased sevenfold since 2017, but the average price has collapsed by more than 60%. The Chinese government would respond to this by saying that their industries are simply more competitive than those abroad, and point out that other countries also subsidize these industries. And this is undeniably true. Just take a look at Tesla, which benefits from generous tax credits from the US government. But there are two differences between government support in China and the rest of the world. The first is in the sheer scale of Beijing's industrial support. China's industrial support spending in 2019 totaled 1.7% of its GDP. That's more than double the level of support given in South Korea and 4 times the relative amount in the USA and Germany. But second, China is different in that its development model is built around the supply side of the economy. This is where the concept of overcapacity comes in. For decades, China has distributed resources into productive capacity rather than to households. Instead of building extensive social welfare, allowing incomes for Chinese workers to increase substantially, or allowing the yuan to appreciate, it has focused on investment into roads, airports, train lines, industrial capacity, and research, and it has kept the yuan weak to help sell this capacity overseas. That means two things. First, it means that production costs are cheaper at every stage of the supply chain. So if you're making EVs, for example, it's not just that BYD gets support from government subsidies and loans, it's all the things they need to make the cars, from tires to windshields to plastic. They're all produced extremely cheaply at home. And on the other side of the coin, it means that Chinese consumers spend less and save a higher proportion of their income. As a result, they consume less of the goods produced in the economy. In 2023, consumption accounted for only 40% of Chinese GDP versus a global average of 57%. Both of these mean that China produces more than it consumes and exports this abroad in the form of a large trade surplus. And according to Deutsche Bank, China represents 32% of global manufacturing, but only 12% of consumption. For example, in 2023, China had enough solar panel production capacity to produce 861 gigawatts of solar panel modules. But here's the kicker: global demand that year was less than half that. This overcapacity scenario pushes down the prices, and so all this production is actually bad news for industry in China and abroad. Chinese factories are losing money as they face insane levels of domestic competition and limited domestic demand. If you look at the share price of the country's major renewable energy companies like Longyi Solar, Mingyang, and Trina Solar, they are all down in the dumps. So the issue isn't as simple as being a zero-sum game between China and the world. It isn't as simple as who pays more in subsidies. It's about the overall structure of the Chinese economy. That's something that no amount of tariffs or angry rhetoric will change. From an economic perspective, the conclusion is clear. Beijing has built an economic system that favors industrial capacity above all else. China's dominance in new energy is state-directed, state-subsidized, and state-supported every step of the way. This has created world-class, innovative companies that can produce much more cheaply than foreign companies. But without true exposure to market forces, Chinese factories produce so much that both companies at home and abroad struggle to make money. And this has become the root of China's trade argument with the United States and other trade partners. But perhaps the debate over the fairness of China's trade dominance and overcapacity misses a crucial point. China now churns out loads of cheap and high-quality renewable energy technology. While that may be bad news for Tesla as well as for many of those loss-making Chinese companies, it's good news for global consumers who pay lower prices. And it's good news, most importantly, for the environment, because we can all buy EVs, solar panels, and other forms of renewable energy more cheaply. But the question for you is, do you want to live in a world where the car you drive, the battery in your phone, and the solar panels that keep your lights on all come from China? Put differently, does it matter if the cat is white or black? Let us know in the comments. Subscribe to 2 and 20 for more on economics and politics.